The note was waiting for me on the kitchen counter when I returned from dropping Emma at soccer practice. Folded once, my name written across the front in handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for 15 years. My husband, Marcus's careful script, each letter perfectly formed the way his mother had taught him in 3rd grade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I almost smiled, thinking it was one of his sweet reminders about dinner plans or a forgotten anniversary. Marcus had always been thoughtful that way, leaving little notes to brighten my day. But as I unfolded the paper, the words hit me like, ice water. If you go to the police, your daughter dies. I know what you did. I know about David Chen. Meet me at the warehouse on Elm Street at midnight. Come alone, or Emma pays the price. My hands began shaking so violently I nearly dropped the note. Emma. My beautiful, brilliant 12-year-old daughter with Marcus's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. The girl who still left drawings on my dresser and insisted on goodnight kisses, even though her friends said she was too old. David Chen. A name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in 3 years, but one that haunted my dreams regularly. The private investigator who'd helped me disappear from my first life, from the woman I used to be before I became Sarah Mitchell, devoted wife and mother in suburban Connecticut. I sank into one of our kitchen chairs, the same ones Marcus and I had picked out at that little furniture store in Hartford when we were newlyweds. Everything around me felt suddenly foreign, threatening. The cheerful yellow walls we'd painted together last spring, the refrigerator covered in Emma's honor roll certificates and soccer team photos, the coffee maker still warm from Marcus's morning ritual. How did he know? How could Marcus possibly know about David Chen? My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Running late at the office. Don't wait up. Love you. The casual normalcy of it made me sick. I stared at his message, then at the note, comparing the handwriting. Identical. The same careful loops on the letter G. The same way he crossed his T's with a slight upward flourish. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Marcus had left for work at 7:30 this morning, kissing me goodbye at the door like he had every day for the past decade. He'd ruffled Emma's hair and reminded her about her history test. He'd seemed perfectly normal, perfectly Marcus, but the note proved otherwise. The warehouse on Elm Street. I knew the place, an abandoned textile factory that had been empty for years, scheduled for demolition next month. It was where I'd met David Chen 3 years ago for our final transaction, where I'd paid him the last of my savings to ensure my old identity stayed buried forever. That meeting was supposed to be the end. The final chapter in the story of Rebecca Walsh, the woman who'd witnessed something she shouldn't have and paid the price. Rebecca Walsh was supposed to be dead, her identity erased so completely that even the most determined investigators would find nothing but dead ends. But somehow, Marcus knew. I walked to the window overlooking our backyard, where Emma's tire swing still hung from the old oak tree. She'd be home in 2 hours, bouncing through the door with grass stains on her uniform and stories about practice. My normal, happy daughter who had no idea her mother had once been someone else entirely. The woman Marcus thought he'd married didn't exist. Sarah Mitchell was a carefully constructed fiction, built from forged documents and rehearsed stories. I'd met Marcus at a coffee shop near the community college where I was pretending to take business classes, drawn to his gentle laugh and the way he listened when I spoke. He'd fallen in love with a ghost, but Emma was real. Our life together was real. Whatever else was false, my love for my daughter and the family we'd built was absolutely authentic. I read the note again, searching for clues. The paper was from our printer upstairs, the same stock Marcus used for work documents. The pen was our kitchen pen, the blue bic we kept in the drawer by the phone. This hadn't been planned far in advance. Something had triggered this. Something. Recent. My laptop was still open on the counter from this morning when I'd been paying bills online. I pulled up the browser history, scrolling through Marcus's recent searches. Most were work-related, some shopping sites, a few news articles. Then I found it, buried in the middle of last week's activity. Rebecca Walsh and David Chen investigator and Connecticut missing persons. My blood turned to ice. He'd been researching me for days, maybe weeks. How long had he known? How long had he been living with the knowledge that his wife was a complete fabrication? I thought about our conversation at breakfast this morning. He'd seemed distracted, quieter than usual. Emma had been chattering about her upcoming school dance, asking if she could wear makeup, and Marcus had just nodded absently. I'd attributed it to work stress, but now I wondered if he'd been planning this confrontation all along. The front door opened, and Emma's voice echoed through the house. "Mom, I'm home. Coach says I might make varsity next year." I quickly shoved the note into my pocket and closed the laptop. "That's wonderful, honey. How was practice?" Emma bounded into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. She looked so much like Marcus in that moment, with his determined expression and bright eyes. Sarah Chen scored 3 goals during scrimmage. She's only in 8th grade, but she's amazing. "Do you think Dad can come to our game on Saturday?" Sarah Chen. The name hit me like a physical blow. Was it a coincidence, or had Marcus somehow orchestrated even this? David Chen had a daughter. I remembered him mentioning her during one of our meetings. She would be about Emma's age now. "I'll ask him," I managed, forcing a smile. "Why don't you go shower? I'll start dinner." As Emma thundered up the stairs, I pulled out the note again. The implications were staggering. If Marcus knew about David Chen, he might know everything. About Rebecca Walsh, about why I'd needed to disappear, about the dangerous people who'd once wanted me dead. But how had he found out? David Chen was a professional, paranoid about security. He'd assured me that our transactions were completely untraceable, that the new identity he'd created for me was bulletproof. Yet somehow, my husband had connected the dots. I opened the kitchen drawer where we kept important documents. Emma's birth certificate, our marriage license, my driver's license, all issued to Sarah Mitchell. But underneath, in a manila envelope I rarely touched, were my backup documents. A passport, social security card, and driver's license for Jennifer Adams, another identity David had created in case Sarah Mitchell was ever compromised. The envelope was lighter than it should have been. I opened it with trembling fingers. Empty. Every document was gone. Marcus had found my emergency identity, too. The sound of the shower running upstairs felt suddenly ominous. Emma was vulnerable, trusting, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. I thought about grabbing her and running, but where could we go? Marcus had my backup documents, and if he really knew about my past, he might know about other safe houses, other contacts. I was trapped. My phone rang, making me jump. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hello?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Hey, beautiful. How was your day?" His voice was warm, familiar, exactly the same tone he'd used when calling me every day for 10 years. "Fine. Emma's home from practice. She's excited about possibly making varsity." "That's great. Listen, I might be even later than I thought. Big presentation tomorrow. Don't worry about saving dinner for me." I stared at the note in my other hand. "Marcus, is everything okay? You seem distant lately." A pause. Then, "Everything's fine, Sarah. Just work stress. I love you." The line went dead. He'd never hung up without waiting for me to say I loved him back. In 15 years, never once. I walked to the kitchen window and peered out at the driveway. Marcus's car wasn't there, but that didn't mean anything. If he was planning something for midnight, he might be watching the house from somewhere else. The shower stopped running upstairs. Emma would be down soon, expecting dinner and homework. help, and all the normal rhythms of our life. I had to decide: confront Marcus now, run with Emma, or play along until midnight and hope I could somehow turn the situation to my advantage. But first, I needed to know exactly what Marcus had discovered. I opened my laptop again and checked our shared cloud storage account. There, in a folder I'd never seen before, were dozens of files: police reports, newspaper articles, investigation records, all about Rebecca Walsh. All about me. The oldest file was dated 6 months ago. Marcus had been investigating me for half a year, carefully documenting every piece of evidence he could find about my former identity. There were photos of the apartment where Rebecca Walsh had lived, copies of her employment records, even security footage from the hotel where I'd witnessed the murder that changed everything. At the bottom of the folder was a video file labeled "For Sarah." My hands shook as I clicked play. Marcus appeared on screen, sitting in his office. He looked tired, older than his 42 years. Behind him, I could see the family photos we'd given him over the years. Emma's, school pictures, vacation snapshots, our wedding portrait. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but strained. "If you're watching this, then you found the note and you know that I know. I've been living with this knowledge for months, trying to decide what to do. The woman I married doesn't exist. The life we've built is based on a lie." He paused, running a hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. "But Emma is real. Our daughter is real, even if her mother isn't, who she claims to be. And that's why we need to talk. Not because I want to destroy our family, but because I want to save it." The video ended abruptly. I stared at the black screen, my mind racing. This wasn't the message of someone planning violence. This was the plea of a confused, betrayed husband who'd discovered his wife's deepest secret. But the note had been so threatening, so cold. The handwriting was definitely Marcus's, but the tone was completely different from the man in the video. Emma's footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. I quickly closed the laptop and started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, trying to look normal, but nothing would ever be normal again. The careful life I'd built was crumbling, and I had until midnight to figure out how to save it. As Emma entered the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower, I made a decision. I would go to the warehouse tonight. I would face whatever Marcus had planned. But first, I needed to make sure Emma was safe. "Hey, sweetie," I said, forcing another smile. "How would you like to have a sleepover at Aunt Lisa's tonight?" Emma frowned. "On a school night? You never let me do that." "Special circumstances." "I'll call her now." As I reached for my phone, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back looked like Sarah Mitchell, Emma's mother, Marcus's wife, a suburban mom with no secrets. But underneath, Rebecca Walsh was stirring, remembering how to survive. By midnight, one of us would be gone forever. I just had to make sure it wasn't me. Lisa's voice crackled through the phone speaker as I watched Emma pack her overnight bag upstairs. "Of course Emma can stay over, but Sarah, you sound terrible. What's going on?" My sister-in-law had always been perceptive, one of the few people who could read between my carefully constructed lines. "Just some things Marcus and I need to work through. Marriage stuff." "On a Tuesday night? With Emma at my house?" Lisa's skepticism was evident. "This isn't like you two. You never fight." She was right. Marcus and I had built our relationship on careful communication, on never letting disagreements fester. But then again, our entire marriage had been built on my lies. "It's complicated, Lisa. I'll explain everything tomorrow, I promise. Just keep Emma busy, okay? Maybe take her to school directly in the morning?" A long pause. "You're scaring me, Sarah." "Everything's fine," I lied, watching Emma through the doorway as she debated between two sweaters. "I just need tonight to sort some things out." After hanging up, I sat on our bed and opened the manila folder I'd retrieved from the basement. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in 3 years. Reminders of who I used to be before I became Sarah Mitchell. Bank statements for Rebecca Walsh. A lease agreement for an apartment in Boston. Employment records from the law firm where I'd worked as a paralegal. The law firm where I'd seen something I shouldn't have seen. It was a Friday night in October, 3 years and 2 months ago. I'd stayed late to finish transcribing depositions, alone in the office while rain hammered the windows. The elevator doors had opened on the 15th floor, and I'd heard voices from the conference room. Partners often worked late, so I'd continued, typing, focused on my screen. Then I'd heard the gunshot. By the time I'd crept to the conference room, Thomas Kellerman was already dead, slumped over the mahogany table with blood pooling beneath his head. Standing over him was Vincent Romano, the firm's most powerful client, calmly wiping down a pistol with his handkerchief. "Clean this up?" Romano had said to someone I couldn't see. "Make it look like a suicide." Kellerman got in over his head, with gambling debts. I'd backed away slowly, heart hammering, but the hallway's motion sensor lights had betrayed me. Romano's head had snapped up, his cold eyes locking with mine through the glass partition. I'd run then, abandoning my purse, my coat, everything but my car keys. The next morning, the news reported Thomas Kellerman's tragic suicide. By that afternoon, I'd received the first threatening phone call. David Chen had found me through a mutual contact, someone who understood that sometimes good people needed to disappear. For $20,000, he'd given me a new identity and a warning. Romano. Had connections everywhere. Police, judges, federal agents. Going to the authorities would only get me killed faster. So Rebecca Walsh had died in a carefully staged car accident, and Sarah Mitchell had been born. I'd moved to Connecticut, enrolled in community college, and tried to forget that I'd ever witnessed a murder. "Mom!" Emma's voice startled me back to the present. She stood in the doorway, backpack slung over her shoulder. "Are you okay? You look sad." I forced a smile and tucked the documents away. "Just tired, sweetie. Ready for your adventure at Aunt Lisa's?" Emma nodded, but her expression remained concerned. She'd inherited Marcus's ability to read people, to sense when something was wrong. "Dad's not really working late, is he?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. How much did she understand? How much had she overheard or intuited about the tension in our house? "Your father and I need to have an important conversation tonight," I said carefully. "Adult stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." We drove to Lisa's in relative silence, Emma chattering occasionally about school while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to focus on the road instead of the approaching midnight deadline. Every car behind us could be Marcus. Every shadow could be a threat. Lisa met us at the door, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun and concern etched across her features. She hugged Emma tight, then pulled me aside while my daughter ran upstairs to the guest room. "Sarah, what's really happening? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a ghost, in many ways. A woman who'd died 3 years ago and been imperfectly resurrected. "Just promise me something," I said, gripping her hands. "If anything happens to me tonight, anything at all, don't let Emma go back to the house until you hear from me directly. Not Marcus, not anyone else. Me." Lisa's face went pale. "Sarah, you're frightening me. Should I call the police?" The police. If only it were that simple. But the note had been explicit. Involving authorities would put Emma in danger. Whether the threat came from Marcus or from someone else who'd discovered my identity, I couldn't risk it. No police. Just trust me. Okay? Keep Emma safe. I kissed my daughter goodbye, memorizing the warmth of her hug and the scent of her strawberry shampoo. If tonight went wrong, it might be the last time I held her. The drive home felt surreal. Familiar streets transformed into something ominous by the weight of impending confrontation. I parked in our driveway and sat for a moment, studying the house Marcus and I had purchased 8 years ago. We'd been so happy then. Newlyweds with dreams of filling the bedrooms with children's laughter. Emma had been our miracle baby, conceived after 2 years of trying and 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. Marcus had cried when she was born, holding her tiny hand and promising to protect her from everything harmful in the world. Now he was the threat. Inside, the house felt hollow without Emma's presence. I moved through the rooms we'd decorated together, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed like evidence of a lie. The family photos on the mantel, the handprint art from Emma's kindergarten class, the anniversary gifts Marcus and I had exchanged over the years. Had any of it been real for him? Or had he been suspicious from the beginning, watching me for signs of deception? I went to his office, a converted bedroom where Marcus handled the household finances and graded papers from his high school history classes. His desk was neater than usual, as if he'd prepared for this confrontation by organizing his affairs. The bottom drawer was locked, which was unusual. Marcus had never been secretive about his work or personal documents. I found the key in his pencil holder, remembering how he'd always joked that hiding keys in obvious places was the best security, because no one expected such simplicity. Inside the drawer was a thick folder labeled Rebecca Walsh Investigation. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing months of meticulous research. He'd found everything: employment records, apartment leases, bank statements, even photographs of me from before my transformation. But it wasn't just documentation of my past life. Marcus had been investigating my death, too. He'd obtained copies of the police report about Rebecca Walsh's car accident, the insurance claims, the death certificate David Chen had somehow managed to file. He'd traced the money trail, discovering that Rebecca Walsh had emptied her bank accounts days before her supposed death. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten timeline in Marcus's careful script, documenting his process of discovery. It had started 6 months ago when Emma's school had requested my social security number for some administrative purpose. A routine background check had turned up inconsistencies, small discrepancies that might have been overlooked by someone less thorough than my methodical husband. One anomaly had led to another. Why did Sarah Mitchell's credit history only go back 10 years? Why were there no childhood friends, no family members besides the carefully constructed references I'd provided? Why did I become anxious whenever true crime shows mentioned witness protection programs? Marcus had approached the investigation like the history teacher he was, methodically gathering evidence and constructing a timeline. He'd even traveled to Boston, visiting the apartment where Rebecca Walsh had lived, talking to former neighbors who remembered the quiet paralegal who'd disappeared after her car was found burned out near the harbor. The final entry in his timeline was dated yesterday. Confirmed. Sarah Mitchell is Rebecca Walsh. Purpose of identity change unknown. Possible criminal activity? Witness protection? Next step? Direct confrontation. I closed the folder, my mind reeling. This wasn't the work of someone planning violence. This was the research of a confused husband trying to understand why his wife had lied to him about everything. But if Marcus had written the timeline yesterday, who had written the threatening note? The handwriting was identical, but the tone was completely different from the methodical, almost academic approach of his investigation. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Change of plans. Marina parking lot. Pier 7. Come now, or the next body they find will be smaller than the last one. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't Marcus. Someone else had discovered my identity. Someone who knew about Emma. Someone who was willing to threaten a child to get to me. But who? And how had they gotten Marcus's handwriting so perfectly? I ran upstairs to our bedroom and pulled out the strongbox hidden behind Marcus's winter coats. Inside was $2,000 in cash, my Jennifer Adams backup passport, and something I'd hoped never to touch again. The prepaid phone David Chen had given me for emergencies. The phone had one number programmed into it. I'd never used it. Never even turned it on since the day David handed it to me with strict instructions to call only if my cover was blown and my life was in immediate danger. I powered it on with shaking fingers and dialed the number. "This line is no longer in service," an automated voice informed me. David Chen was gone. My lifeline, my security blanket, had vanished just when I needed him most. I sat on the bed Marcus and I had shared for 10 years, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. In his bedside drawer were reading glasses and allergy medication. On his side of the closet hung the ties I'd bought him for Father's Days and birthdays. Everything normal, everything mundane, everything real, except the man himself was missing, and someone was using his handwriting to threaten our daughter. The marina was 20 minutes away, a place where Marcus and I had taken Emma fishing when she was younger. She'd never had the patience for it, preferring to skip rocks and collect shells while we sat on the pier with our unused rods. I could call Lisa, tell her to take Emma and run. But where would they go that my mysterious tormentor couldn't find? Them? If someone had discovered my identity, they likely knew about my family connections too. I could ignore the text and hope it was a bluff. But if it wasn't, if someone really did have Marcus, then Emma's father might already be dead, or I could go to the marina and face whatever was waiting for me there. I checked the time, 11:15 p.m. The original note had said midnight at the warehouse, but the text had changed the location and moved up the timeline. Someone was improvising, adapting their plan on the fly. I tucked the Jennifer Adams passport into my jacket pocket along with the cash, grabbed my car keys, and headed for the door. If I was walking into a trap, at least I'd do it on my own terms. But first, I sent a message to Lisa from my regular phone. "If you don't hear from me by 8 a.m. tomorrow, take Emma to the police station downtown. Ask for Detective Rodriguez. Tell him Sarah Mitchell is Rebecca Walsh and that Vincent Romano found me." As I drove toward the marina, past the familiar landmarks of the life I'd built in Connecticut, I wondered if I'd ever see Emma again. Whether she'd remember me as the mother who'd loved her unconditionally, or as the woman who'd brought danger into her safe suburban world. The parking lot at Pier 7 was empty, except for a single car I recognized immediately. Marcus's silver Honda Civic, the one he'd been driving when he left for work this morning. Whatever was happening, my husband was already here. Marcus's car sat under the single working streetlight in the marina parking lot, its windows dark and revealing nothing. I parked 3 spaces away and killed the engine, listening to the sound of water lapping against the docks and the distant hum of highway traffic. The marina at night was a different world from the cheerful family destination where we'd brought Emma on weekend afternoons. Shadows stretched between the boats like dark fingers, and the normally welcoming pier lights seemed cold and menacing. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel hung heavy in the humid air. I approached Marcus's Honda, carefully, my footsteps echoing off the concrete. The driver's door was unlocked, keys still dangling from the ignition. His briefcase sat on the passenger seat, along with the thermos of coffee I'd filled for him that morning. Everything looked normal, except for the man who should have been there. A piece of paper was tucked under the windshield wiper. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, recognizing Marcus's handwriting again. Pier 7, slip 23. Come alone. No phones, no weapons. You have 5 minutes before I start making permanent changes to our family structure. The phrasing was wrong. Marcus was a high school teacher, precise with language but never coldly formal. He said things like, "grab dinner," and "Emma's being a teenager again." He didn't speak in corporate euphemisms about permanent changes to family structure. Someone was using his hand to write messages that didn't come from his heart. Slip 23 was at the far end of the pier, past the larger boats that wealthy weekenders kept moored there. I walked slowly, scanning the shadows between the hulls, my heart hammering against my ribs. The wooden pier creaked under my feet, and somewhere in the distance, a halyard clanged against a mast in the night breeze. A figure stepped out from behind. A cabin cruiser as I approached. Not Marcus, too tall, too thin, moving with a predatory grace my gentle husband had never possessed. The man wore dark clothing and a baseball cap pulled low over his features. "Rebecca Walsh," he said, and his voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. "You're exactly as I pictured you." "Where is my husband?" I kept my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "Safe. For now." He gestured toward the boat behind him. "We need to talk." The cabin cruiser was expensive, at least 40 feet long with gleaming white fiberglass and brass fittings. The kind of boat Vincent Romano had owned, according to the financial records I'd glimpsed during my time at the law firm. The name painted on the stern read, "Second Chance," in elegant script. "After you," the man said, indicating the boarding ladder. I climbed aboard on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of how isolated we were. The marina office was closed, the nearest occupied boat at least 100 yards away. If I screamed, no one would hear me over the ambient noise of water and wind. The main cabin was luxuriously appointed with leather seating and polished wood paneling. Soft lighting revealed a small galley kitchen and a dining table where Marcus sat with his hands zip-tied behind his back and duct tape across his mouth. His eyes were wide with terror, but he appeared unharmed. "Marcus!" I started toward him, but the stranger caught my arm. "Sit down, Rebecca. We have business to discuss. My name is Sarah Mitchell. Your name," he said with cold amusement, "is whatever I decide it is. But for the purposes of our conversation, let's use Rebecca. It has such a nice ring to it, don't you think?" I sat across from Marcus, trying to communicate reassurance through eye contact while my mind raced through possibilities. The stranger was definitely not Vincent Romano, too young, wrong build. But he clearly knew about my past, about the murder I'd witnessed. 3 years ago, the man continued, settling into the captain's chair. "You saw something unfortunate. A business disagreement that got out of hand. Instead of being reasonable about it, you disappeared. Romano killed Thomas Kellerman in cold blood. I saw him do it. Mr. Romano settled a dispute with a business partner who was stealing from him. These things happen in competitive industries." The man's tone was conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "What doesn't happen often is having witnesses run away and create unnecessary complications." Marcus made a muffled sound behind the tape, his eyes darting between us. I could see him processing the information, understanding for the first time exactly who his wife really was. "David Chen did a good job with your new identity," the stranger continued. "Very thorough, very professional. It took us quite a while to track you down." "Us?" I glanced around the cabin, looking for signs of other people. "How many of you are there?" "Enough. The question isn't how many of us there are, Rebecca. The question is how many of you there are going to be after tonight." He pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be surveillance photos. Pictures of Emma at soccer practice, at school, walking into Lisa's house just hours ago. Pictures of Marcus leaving for work this morning, completely unaware. He was being watched. Pictures of me grocery shopping, dropping Emma at activities, living the normal suburban life I'd worked so hard to build. "Lovely family," he said, studying a photo of Emma laughing at something on her phone. "Your daughter has her father's eyes, don't you think? Don't touch her." The words came out as a growl, surprising me with their intensity. "She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this. Children are such powerful motivators, don't you find? They make parents so much more cooperative." Marcus struggled against his restraints, making angry noises behind the tape. The stranger glanced at him with mild irritation. "Your husband has been asking uncomfortable questions about you for months, digging into records that should have stayed buried. We became aware of his investigation when he contacted certain agencies in Boston." My stomach dropped. "What agencies? Does it matter? The point is, Marcus Mitchell has become a liability, just like Rebecca Walsh was a liability 3 years ago. I looked at my husband, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The methodical teacher who graded papers with careful attention to detail. The devoted father who kept meticulous records of Emma's school achievements and soccer statistics. Of course he'd been thorough in investigating me. It was who he was. "What do you want?" I asked. Initially, we wanted Rebecca Walsh to disappear permanently, but circumstances have changed. He swiped to a different photo on the tablet, Vincent Romano in handcuffs being led away by federal agents. Mr. Romano was arrested last week on racketeering charges. Seems the FBI had been building a case against him for years. The news hit me like a physical blow. Romano was in custody. The man who'd been hunting me for 3 years was finally facing justice for his crimes. "So you see," the stranger continued, "your testimony is no longer a threat to Mr. Romano. He's going to prison regardless of what you witnessed. But there are other people who were associated with Mr. Romano's business interests, who would prefer that certain details remain buried." "What details?" "Thomas Kellerman wasn't just stealing money, Rebecca. He was documenting financial transactions, keeping records of payments and arrangements that could implicate dozens of people in various enterprises. People who are still free, still conducting business, still very much interested in their privacy." The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Romano had killed Kellerman to silence him, but the records Kellerman had been keeping were still out there somewhere. And I was the only living witness who could testify about Romano's methods of dealing with threats to his organization. "The FBI will want to interview you," the stranger said. "They'll ask what you saw, what you heard, what you might have learned about Mr. Romano's business practices during your time at the law firm. Your answers could be very damaging to people who weren't directly involved in Mr. Kellerman's unfortunate accident. So this isn't about Romano anymore. This is about protecting his associates." Such a quick mind. I can see why David Chen was impressed with you. At the mention of Chen's name, something cold settled in my stomach. What happened to David? The stranger smiled, and the expression was genuinely chilling. Mr. Chen was very professional, very discreet, right up until federal agents started asking him questions about his client list. Seems he developed a sudden case of conscience about helping criminals disappear. Is he alive? That depends on how cooperative you choose to be. Marcus was making increasingly desperate sounds, fighting against his restraints. I could see blood on his wrists where the zip ties were cutting into his skin. "Here's what's going to happen," the stranger said, setting down the tablet. "You're going to write a confession. A very detailed confession about how you killed Thomas Kellerman and framed Vincent Romano for the murder. How you've been living under a false identity, consumed by guilt over your crime. That's insane. No one will believe it. They'll believe it when your body is found with the confession and the murder weapon. A tragic case of a guilty conscience, finally overwhelming a desperate woman." I stared at him, understanding dawning. This wasn't just about silencing me. This was about rewriting history, turning the witness into the perpetrator and clearing Romano's associates by making me the scapegoat. "And if I refuse?" He gestured toward Marcus. "Your husband dies first, then your daughter, then you. In that order, so you can appreciate the full cost of your decision." The boat rocked gently in the water, and I could hear the sound of another engine approaching in the distance. Backup arriving, or just another boat heading home late? "I need time to think," I said. "You have 30 seconds. I looked at Marcus, saw the love and fear in his eyes despite everything he'd learned about me. Tonight, I thought about Emma, safely sleeping at Lisa's house, dreaming of soccer games and school dances and all the normal concerns of a 12-year-old girl. I thought about Thomas Kellerman, who died trying to expose corruption and was about to be remembered as the victim of a woman who'd never hurt anyone in her life. "I'll write your confession," I said finally. The stranger smiled and pulled a legal pad from a drawer. I knew you'd see reason. Start writing, Rebecca, and make it convincing. But as I took the pen, I noticed something he'd missed. In the galley area behind him, a red light was blinking on what appeared to be a marine radio. Someone was monitoring this frequency, listening to our conversation. I started writing, hoping whoever was listening understood that I was running out of time. I pressed the pen to paper, my hand deliberately unsteady as I began to write. The stranger was watching me carefully, but his attention was focused on the confession, not on my furtive glances toward the marine radio behind him. My name is Rebecca Walsh, I wrote, and I killed Thomas Kellerman on October 15th, 3 years ago. Each word felt like poison, but I forced myself to continue while listening for any sound that might indicate help was coming. The blinking red light on the radio suggested someone was indeed monitoring this channel, but I had no way of knowing if they understood the situation or were merely overhearing random marina traffic. Slower, the stranger commanded. Make it neat. This needs to look authentic when the police find it. Marcus was still struggling against his bonds, his eyes never leaving my face. I could see him trying to understand how the woman he'd married for 10 years could be writing a murder. Confession. The weight of his betrayal and confusion added another layer of pain to an already unbearable situation. Include details about your relationship with Kellerman, the stranger continued. Make it personal. Crimes of passion are easier to believe than random violence. I looked up from the legal pad. I barely knew Thomas Kellerman. We worked in the same building but different departments. Then make something up. You were having an affair. He was blackmailing you. Use your imagination. The boat engine I'd heard earlier was getting closer. Through the small porthole, I could see navigation lights moving across the water. A Coast Guard cutter, maybe, or just another late-night boater. The stranger seemed unconcerned, confident in his isolation. I returned to the confession, writing slowly and hoping the approaching boat was more than coincidence. Thomas and I had been having an affair for 6 months. He threatened to tell his wife unless I left my job and ran away with him. The lies flowed easier than I expected. Years of maintaining Sarah Mitchell's false identity had taught me how to construct believable fiction from fragments of truth. Better, the stranger said, reading over my shoulder. But add more emotional detail. Fear, desperation. The moment you decided violence was your only option. A new sound joined the approaching engine. The distinctive whoop of a marine patrol siren. The stranger's head snapped up, his casual confidence evaporating. Routine patrol, he said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. The siren grew louder, clearly heading in our direction. I kept writing, trying to appear absorbed in the confession while my heart raced with hope. Someone had been listening to the marine radio. Someone understood that this was not a routine conversation between boat passengers. Finish it, the stranger ordered, his hand moving inside his jacket. Now. I could see the outline of a weapon. Under his clothing, the same type of compact pistol Vincent Romano had used to kill Thomas Kellerman. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to die the same way as the man whose murder I'd witnessed. Marcus made a muffled sound of alarm, his eyes wide as he noticed the stranger's movement. Even restrained and gagged, my husband was trying to protect me, straining against his zip ties until blood ran freely from his wrists. Sarah, I whispered, using my real name for what might be the last time. I'm so sorry. The approaching boat cut its engine, and I could hear voices calling across the water. Official voices, authoritative and commanding. This is the Coast Guard. Prepare to be boarded, the stranger cursed in what sounded like Russian and pulled out his pistol. This is your fault. You signaled somehow. I've been sitting right here writing your confession. How could I have signaled anyone? But even as I said it, I realized what had happened. The marine radio wasn't just receiving, it was transmitting. Everything we'd said in the main cabin had been broadcast on an open channel, probably picked up by multiple vessels and shore stations. Coast Guard cutter, Vigilant to pleasure craft second chance. A voice crackled over the radio. Cut your engines and prepare for boarding. This is not a request. The stranger moved quickly, grabbing my arm and hauling me to my feet. You're coming with me. Insurance policy. He pressed the gun against my ribs and forced me toward the stern of the boat. Through the windows, I could see the Coast Guard cutter. Alongside, its powerful searchlight illuminating our deck. Armed personnel in tactical gear were already preparing to board. Let the woman go. The amplified voice carried clearly across the water. Release your weapon and surrender immediately. Not happening, the stranger shouted back. I've got 2 hostages. Back off or they both die. I felt the cold metal of the gun barrel against my spine and tried to stay calm. This was no longer about the confession or covering up Romano's associates. This had become a hostage situation, with federal agents involved. Marcus was making desperate sounds behind his gag, trying to communicate something urgent. I followed his gaze and saw what he'd noticed. A second Coast Guard vessel approaching from the opposite direction. We were being surrounded. Let me tell you how this works, the stranger said, his voice carrying a new edge of panic. I'm going to take one of the hostages with me. The other stays here to ensure my safe passage. You have 30 seconds to clear a path or I start reducing my insurance. The Coast Guard's response was immediate and professional. Negative. Release both. Hostages and surrender. There is no safe passage. This marina is completely surrounded. I could see the truth of their statement. In addition to the 2 cutters, smaller boats were taking positions around the pier. Red laser dots danced across the cabin windows as sniper. Sights locked onto our position. They're not going to let you leave, I said quietly. This is over. It's over when I say it's over. He pressed the gun harder against my back. We're going to walk to the boarding ladder, nice and slow. Any sudden movements and your husband watches you die before his turn comes. But as we moved toward the stern, the stranger made a critical error. He stepped directly in front of the key, radio, blocking his own view of Marcus while focusing on the Coast Guard personnel preparing to board. Marcus had been working at his restraints throughout our entire conversation, using the distraction of my confession and the arriving authorities to methodically stretch the zip ties. His high school wrestling experience had taught him how to dislocate his thumb to slip out of holds, and I watched in amazement as he freed one hand. The stranger was still focused on the Coast Guard, calculating angles and escape routes that didn't exist. He never saw Marcus rise silently from the dining table, moving with desperate determination. My husband hit him from behind like a linebacker, driving both of them into the galley counter. The gun went off, the bullet shattering a window, and I threw myself to the floor as the 2 men struggled. Sarah, get out, Marcus shouted, his voice raw from the removed gag. Get to the Coast Guard. I scrambled toward the boarding ladder as chaos erupted around me. More gunshots, shouting voices, the sound of tactical teams breaching the cabin from multiple entry points. I climbed up onto the deck just as Coast Guard personnel swarmed aboard, their weapons drawn and voices commanding immediate surrender. The fight in the cabin ended abruptly. Through the broken window, I could see Marcus on the floor, bleeding, but conscious. The stranger lay motionless nearby, zip ties securing his wrists behind his back while a medic checked his pulse. Ma'am, are you injured? A female Coast Guard officer was checking me for wounds, her hands professional but gentle. I'm okay. My husband, is he okay? He's being treated. You're both safe now. As I was helped onto the Coast Guard cutter, I caught a glimpse of the marina parking lot. Police cars, FBI vehicles, and ambulances lined the shore. This had escalated far beyond a simple hostage situation. A man in a suit approached me, his badge identifying him as Special Agent Morrison from the FBI. The name struck me as ironic. My husband's last name, carried by the federal agent who would now have to sort through the wreckage of my carefully constructed lies. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, consulting a tablet. Or should I say Ms. Walsh? We've been looking for you for quite some time. Is my daughter safe? It was the only question that mattered now. Emma is secure with your sister-in-law. She doesn't know what's happened yet, but she's protected. I nodded, feeling the weight of 3 years finally lifting from my shoulders. The hiding was over. The lies were finished. Whatever came next, at least my family was safe. Vincent Romano was arrested. Last week, Agent Morrison continued. His organization is being dismantled piece by piece. Your testimony about Thomas Kellerman's murder is crucial to ensuring he stays in prison for the rest of his life. What about the man in the boat? The one who forced me to write the confession? Dmitry Volkov. He's been on our radar for months, as Romano's enforcer. We've been monitoring his communications, which is how we knew about tonight's meeting. When your conversation started broadcasting on the Marine Emergency Channel, we realized you were in immediate danger. I looked back at the second chance, where crime scene technicians were already processing evidence. Marcus was being loaded onto a stretcher, conscious and arguing with the paramedics about whether he needed to go to the hospital. Your husband saved your life, Agent Morrison observed, and possibly prevented a much larger conspiracy from succeeding. If Volkov had gotten that confession and staged your death, it would have damaged our entire case against Romano's network. As we headed toward shore, I watched the marina shrink behind us. The place where I'd brought Emma fishing, where we'd eaten ice cream and collected shells, had become the site of a federal operation that would dominate news cycles for weeks. But, more importantly, it was where the lies finally ended. The woman who climbed off that Coast Guard cutter was neither Rebecca Walsh nor Sarah Mitchell. She was someone new, someone who would have to learn how to live with the truth finally exposed. The hardest part would be explaining everything to Emma. My daughter deserved to know who her mother really was, and why their perfect suburban life had been built on such dangerous foundations. As we reached the dock, I saw Marcus being loaded into an ambulance. Our eyes met across the chaos of emergency vehicles and federal agents, and in his expression, I saw something I hadn't dared hope for: forgiveness. The reckoning was just beginning, but at least we would face it together. The FBI field office in Saitsuien, Hartford smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. I sat in a sterile interview room, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm water, watching Agent Morrison arrange files on the metal table between us. 48 hours had passed since the marina, and I still felt disconnected from reality, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold on a television screen. Your husband is being released from the hospital this morning, Agent Morrison said, settling into his chair. 12 stitches on his forehead, bruised ribs, but no permanent damage. He's asking to see you. I nodded, though part of me wondered if Marcus really wanted to see his wife, or if he was simply curious to meet the stranger who had been living in his house for 10 years. Before we arrange that reunion, Morrison continued, we need to discuss your testimony. Vincent Romano's trial begins in 6 weeks. The prosecution needs to know exactly what you're willing to say under oath. He opened the first file, revealing crime scene photographs from Thomas Kellerman's murder. Even after 3 years, seeing those images sent ice through my veins. Kellerman slumped over the conference table, blood pooling beneath his head, Romano standing calmly in the background wiping down his weapon. These photos were taken by the building's security system, Morrison explained. Romano's people disabled the cameras in the conference room, but they missed the one in the hallway that captured this angle through the glass partition. I stared at the images, remembering the terror I'd felt that night. If you already have photographic evidence, why? Do you need my testimony? Because photographs don't capture audio. They don't show what led up to the shooting or what Romano said afterward. Your eyewitness account provides the context that transforms this from a possible self-defense situation into premeditated murder. Morrison turned to the next page, revealing transcripts of phone conversations between Romano and his associates. We've been building this case for 5 years. Wiretaps, financial records, testimony from lower-level operatives. But Romano has been careful to insulate himself from direct involvement in most of the violence. Except with Kellerman. That night, Romano lost his temper and handled the situation personally instead of delegating it to someone like Volkov. It's the one time we can tie him directly to a murder. I thought about Dmitry Volkov, the man who had forced me to write that false confession. What's happening with him? Volkov is cooperating fully. Seems he's more afraid of spending life in prison than he is of Romano's retribution. He's already provided details about 12 other murders he committed on Romano's orders. The casual way Morrison discussed multiple homicides made my stomach turn. How many people had died because I'd run away instead of going to the police 3 years ago? You're wondering if those deaths are your fault, Morrison observed, reading my expression with unsettling accuracy. Aren't they? If I'd come forward immediately, Romano would have had you killed within 24 hours, and we still wouldn't have had enough evidence to prosecute him. Your survival allowed us to build a comprehensive case. Those deaths aren't on your conscience. A knock at the door interrupted us. Another agent entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of barely controlled excitement. Morrison, you need to see this. Volkov just gave us Romano's financial records going back 15 years. Bank accounts in the Caymans, property holdings in Eastern Europe, shell companies we never knew existed. Morrison studied the tablet, his eyebrows rising. This is bigger than we thought. Sarah. What would you prefer to be? Called? The question caught me off guard. I'd been Rebecca Walsh for 26 years, Sarah Mitchell for 10, but neither name felt entirely real anymore. I don't know, I admitted. Sarah is who my family knows. Rebecca is who I used to be. I guess I need to figure out who I am now. Morrison nodded sympathetically. Identity reconstruction is common among protected witnesses. We have counselors who specialize in helping people integrate their past and present selves. Am I going into witness protection again? That depends on several factors. How much danger you face after testifying, whether you want to return to your life in Connecticut, what kind of support system you have. I thought about Emma, probably sitting in Lisa's kitchen right now, wondering why she hadn't been allowed to go home or see her parents. My daughter's life had been shattered by my secrets, and I had no idea how to begin putting the pieces back together. Can I see my husband now? Morrison gathered his files. He's waiting downstairs. But Rebecca, Sarah, there are some things you should know first. My heart sank. What things? Marcus has been cooperating with our investigation. When he first discovered inconsistencies in your background, he contacted us. He's been feeding us information about your behavior and whereabouts for the past month. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. My husband hadn't just been investigating me privately. He'd been working with the FBI. He thought you might be a criminal, Morrison continued. A con artist who had targeted him for his modest savings and stable life. It wasn't until Volkov took him hostage that he understood you were the victim, not the perpetrator. I stared at the metal table, processing this revelation. Marcus had suspected me of being a criminal. He'd watched me with our daughter, shared our bed, made love to me, all while believing I was some kind of predator who had infiltrated his life. He wants to explain, Morrison said gently. He's been asking to see you since he regained consciousness, the SAW. Elevator ride down felt interminable. I tried to prepare myself for facing Marcus, but how do you ready yourself to meet a husband who had been secretly investigating you for months? He was waiting in another sterile room, his head bandaged and his left arm in a sling. When I entered, he looked up with an expression of such profound sadness that I almost turned around and left. Sarah, he said, my false name sounding strange. In his mouth. Rebecca, I corrected, sitting across from him. My real name is Rebecca Walsh. We stared at each other across the table like strangers, which in many ways we were. This was the first truly honest moment of our entire relationship. I'm sorry, Marcus said finally. "I'm sorry I investigated you. Sorry I involved the FBI. Sorry I didn't trust you enough to ask directly. What would you have asked? Hey, honey, are you secretly a different person living under a false identity?" There's no casual way to bring that up. I could have asked why you flinch when true crime shows mention witness protection. I could have asked why you never talk about your childhood or why you have no photos from before we met. I could have asked why you always pay cash and avoid having your picture taken. The accuracy of his observations was unsettling. I'd thought I was being careful, maintaining my cover, but Marcus had been cataloging my suspicious behaviors for years. When did you first suspect? Really suspect? About 6 months ago when the school needed your social security number for Emma's college prep program. The background check showed some irregularities, and I started digging deeper. But you had doubts before that. Marcus nodded reluctantly. Little things, the way you'd change the subject when I asked about your parents, how you never seemed to run into anyone you knew from before we met, your reaction when Emma wanted to do a family tree project for school. I remembered that project. Emma had been so excited to research our family history, and I'd invented elaborate stories about dead relatives and lost records to explain why we couldn't participate fully. I thought you were running from debt, Marcus continued. Or maybe an abusive ex-husband. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me eventually, but then you started investigating. After the Social Security irregularities, I had to know, not just for me, but for Emma. If you were dangerous, if you'd brought some threat into our home. So you called the FBI. Marcus's face flushed with shame. I contacted them to ask about identity theft, thinking maybe someone had stolen your information. Agent Morrison said they'd look into it, but then weeks went by without any contact. I didn't know they were building a case around you. We sat in silence, the weight of 10 years of deception hanging between us. Everything Marcus thought he knew about his wife was false, and everything I thought I knew about my husband's trust was equally illusory. Emma doesn't know anything yet, Marcus said eventually. What are we going to tell her? The truth. She deserves that much. I thought about our daughter, so bright and perceptive. She'd probably sensed the tension between us for months without understanding its source. Will she be safe? After I testify against Romano? Morrison says yes. Romano's organization is finished, and most of his associates are more concerned with saving themselves than seeking revenge. Most of them. Marcus reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Rebecca, I want you to know that despite everything, despite the lies and the investigation and the danger, I don't regret our life together. You're an incredible mother to Emma, and you've been a good wife to me. Built on deception, built on love. The person you've been for the past 10 years, the mother and wife and community member, that's real. The name doesn't matter. I wanted to believe him, but trust, once broken, doesn't heal easily. Marcus had spent months suspecting me of criminal behavior while sharing our bed and raising our child. The cognitive dissonance must have been enormous. What happens now? I asked. Now we figure out how to move forward. The three of us together, if you're willing. Agent Morrison appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Rebecca, we need to talk. The urgency in his voice made my stomach drop. What kind of situation? David Chen is alive, and he wants to meet with you. Marcus and I exchanged glances. David Chen, the man who had created Sarah Mitchell and disappeared when I needed him most, was suddenly back in the picture. Where is he? I asked. In custody. He was arrested trying to board a flight to Switzerland with 3 passports and $500,000 in cash. Claims he has information about other Romano associates who are still at large. The room seemed to spin slightly. Just when I thought the chaos was settling, new complications emerged. David Chen knew all my secrets, all the details of how Sarah Mitchell had been constructed. If he was talking to federal agents, Does he know about Emma? About Marcus? Morrison's expression was grim. He knows everything, Rebecca, and he's very interested in making a deal. David Chen looked nothing like the confident professional who had handed me a new identity 3 years ago. The man sitting in the federal holding cell was gaunt and hollow-eyed, his expensive suit replaced by orange prison scrubs. When Agent Morrison led me to the visitation room, Chen's hands shook as he reached for the phone on his side of the reinforced glass. "Rebecca," he said, his voice barely audible through the speaker. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Agent Morrison said you had information about Romano's associates, people who might still be a threat to my family." Chen glanced nervously at Morrison, who stood behind me with his arms crossed. "Before I say anything else, I need you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. When I helped you disappear, I thought Romano would eventually lose interest and move on. But he didn't. He couldn't. Thomas Kellerman had been documenting everything for the FBI. Financial transactions, meeting locations, names of associates. Kellerman was building a case against Romano's entire organization. When Romano killed him, he thought he was eliminating the threat. He didn't realize the real danger was you." Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of documentation?" Chen's eyes darted between us. Kellerman had been feeding information to the Bureau for 2 years before his death. He kept copies of everything: contracts, wire transfer records, photographs from meetings. But he was paranoid about digital security, so everything was on paper, hidden in physical locations. "Where?" Morrison's voice was sharp with interest. "That's where it gets complicated." Chen rubbed his face with trembling hands. "Kellerman told me about the documents during our last conversation. He was scared, said Romano was getting suspicious. He gave me 3 addresses where he'd hidden backup copies of his files." My stomach dropped. "You've had evidence that could have convicted Romano for 3 years?" "I tried to retrieve it after you disappeared, but Romano's people were watching all the locations. I figured the FBI would find it eventually through other means. I didn't realize how important it was until Volkov contacted me last week." Morrison stepped closer to the glass. "Volkov contacted you?" "He said Romano's associates were planning to eliminate all loose ends before the trial. That included me, Rebecca, and anyone else who might have knowledge of the organization's activities. Thought about the children's drawings still hanging on our refrigerator, Emma's soccer schedule pinned to the bulletin board. My daughter had been living in danger for weeks without knowing it." "The addresses," Morrison pressed. "We need them now." Chen provided 3 locations: a storage unit in Boston, a safety deposit box in New York, and a hidden compartment in Kellerman's former office building. Within hours, FBI teams had recovered boxes of documents that painted a comprehensive picture of Romano's criminal empire spanning 15 years and dozens of murders. But the most important discovery was in Kellerman's personal notes. Tucked between financial records was a handwritten journal detailing his growing fear of Romano and his decision to cooperate with federal investigators. The final entry, dated the day before his murder, contained a chilling revelation. "Romano, suspects I'm talking to the FBI. He's planning something for tomorrow night's meeting. If anything happens to me, the woman who works late in the paralegal office will be the only witness. Someone needs to protect her. She has no idea what she's walking into." Thomas Kellerman had known I would be in danger. Even facing his own death, he'd been thinking about protecting an innocent bystander. 3 weeks later, I sat in the witness stand of a federal courthouse in Boston, raising my right hand to swear to tell the truth. Marcus and Emma were in the gallery behind me, flanked by federal marshals who had been protecting our family since Chen's revelations about ongoing threats. Emma had taken the news of my true identity with the resilience that continually amazed me. After the initial shock and tears, she'd peppered me with questions about my previous life, my reasons for hiding, and whether any of our memories together were false. Her biggest concern had been whether I was still her real mother, a question that broke my heart with its sincerity. DNA doesn't change just because someone's name does, I'd told her, holding her close in Lisa's guest bedroom where we'd been staying. I'm the same person who taught you to ride a bike and stayed up with you when you had nightmares. The only difference is now, you know why I sometimes seemed scared for no reason. Marcus had been quieter in his acceptance, still processing the revelation that his instincts about my deception had been correct, while simultaneously grappling with guilt about his investigation. We'd started couples counseling, working through the complex emotions of a marriage built on necessary lies and mutual mistrust. Vincent Romano sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit, flanked by 3 attorneys who had failed to prevent this trial despite months of legal maneuvering. His eyes never left my face as I recounted the events of that October night 3 years ago. "Can you identify the person who shot Thomas Kellerman?" the prosecutor asked. "Vincent Romano," I said, pointing directly at him, "the defendant." "And what did you observe Mr. Romano do immediately after shooting Mr. Kellerman?" I described the cold efficiency with which Romano had wiped down the weapon, his instructions to clean up the scene, and his calm demeanor in the face of murder. The jury listened intently, their faces reflecting the horror I'd felt that night. Romano's defense attorney tried to shake my testimony during cross-examination, suggesting I was an unreliable witness who had fabricated the story to gain federal protection. But the physical evidence corroborated every detail of my account, and Volkov's testimony about Romano's subsequent efforts to silence me eliminated any doubt about his guilt. The trial lasted 6 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, racketeering, and conspiracy. Romano showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As we left the courthouse, Agent Morrison fell into step beside us. "It's over," he said simply. "Romano will die in federal prison, and his organization has been completely dismantled." Emma slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the waiting car. "Does this mean we can go home now?" I looked at Marcus, who squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. Home was a complicated concept for someone who had lived under false identities, but I knew what she meant. Emma wanted to return to her room with the soccer posters and the tire swing in the backyard. She wanted her normal life restored. "Yes," I said, "we can go home." But home would be different now. Rebecca Walsh was no longer a secret to be hidden, and Sarah Mitchell was no longer a lie to be maintained. I was something new, a combination of who I'd been and who I'd become, freed from the necessity of deception. 6 months after Romano's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of our Connecticut house, watching Emma practice soccer drills in the backyard, while Marcus graded papers at the dining room table. The morning routine felt familiar yet transformed by honesty. The local newspaper had eventually discovered my identity and published a series of articles about the suburban mother who had helped bring down a criminal empire. The attention had been uncomfortable but brief, and our neighbors had been surprisingly supportive. Emma's friends thought it was cool that her mom was a witness in a famous trial, and Marcus's students treated him like a celebrity for being married to someone who had outsmarted the FBI for years. David Chen had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for obstruction of justice and document fraud, but his cooperation had resulted in the arrest of 12 additional Romano associates. He'd written me a letter from prison, apologizing for abandoning me when I needed help, and expressing admiration for the life I'd built despite the constant danger. I'd started using my real name, Rebecca Mitchell, combining my original identity with the family I'd chosen. It felt honest in a way that neither Rebecca Walsh nor Sarah Mitchell ever had. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Agent Morrison's name appeared on the caller ID, which no longer filled me with terror. These days, his calls were usually routine check-ins or updates about plea agreements from Romano's former associates. "Rebecca, I have news," Morrison said without preamble. "Romano died in federal prison this morning. heart attack in his cell. I set down my coffee cup, processing this information. The man who had haunted my dreams for 3 years was dead. "How do you feel?" Morrison asked. I looked out at Emma, who had just executed a perfect goal kick and was celebrating with arms raised in triumph. Marcus glanced up from his papers and smiled at our daughter's enthusiasm. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel completely free." After hanging up, I walked outside to join Emma's practice session. Marcus followed, and for the next hour we took turns being goalie while she perfected her shots. It was an ordinary suburban afternoon, the kind I'd longed for during all those months of looking over my shoulder. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table discussing Emma's upcoming high school applications and Marcus's plans for summer vacation, I realized that the life I'd built under false pretenses had become authentically mine. The love we shared wasn't diminished by the lies that had protected it. Emma looked up from her homework. "Mom, did you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't seen that murder?" I considered the question seriously. Without that terrible night, I would never have become Sarah Mitchell. I would never have met Marcus at that coffee shop or fallen in love with his gentle laugh. Emma would never have existed. "I think," I said carefully, "that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best parts of our lives. I wouldn't change anything that brought us together as a family." Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was warm and familiar, grounded in 10 years of shared history that was finally completely honest. Outside, the sun was setting over our suburban neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Emma's soccer tournament, Marcus's parent-teacher conferences, the ordinary complexities of family life. But tonight, for the first time since that October evening 3 years ago, I felt completely safe. The woman who had witnessed a murder was gone. The woman who had lived in hiding was gone. What remained was a mother, a wife, and a survivor who had learned that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in running away, but in finding your way back home to the people who love you, no matter what name you use or what secrets you've carried. Vincent Romano was dead. David Chen was in prison. Dmitry Volkov was cooperating with federal authorities. The nightmare that had begun with a handwritten note in my husband's careful script was finally completely over. I was Rebecca Mitchell, and I was home.